Could you explain what Islam means to you? Because what we heard tonight through you is a message of faith and hope that we've been waiting for spiritual leaders to deliver for 3.5 decades.
I remember only months after the revolution took place and Khomeini returned to Iran, there were two particular heads of state that I hold in esteem dearly. The late President Sadat of Egypt and the late King Hassan of Morocco. They both said that if this is Islam, we are not Muslims. So I suppose throughout history we've seen how easily twisting an ideology and perverting it, weaponizing it, politicizing it, could take us down the wrong path. And this is precisely what Khomeini has done, to the point that even the clergy that supposedly is representing the faith that he claimed took steps away from him, calling this an aberration, calling it something that has nothing to do with tenets of religion. To me, religion has always been a private matter between a human being and the way he or she chooses to have faith in the Almighty or whatever. It should not be. It should not be a matter of trying to impose our personal thoughts or ideologies on anyone else. I hope we see the day that on the streets of Iran, like it used to be, by the way, for the most part, anyone asking a fellow Iranian, what do you believe in? None of my business, none of anybody's business. But the law has to protect this. And this is what we should all understand, that the guarantee for religious freedom is based on not just tolerance and not just these value systems of understanding the need for pluralism, but to understand how critical it is to respect these rights, something that this regime has undermined in the name of, oddly enough, religion. That's where the difference is. So as long as we recognize where the difference lies, when we realize that when people are free to worship as they want, but in freedom and under the rule of law, then we would not have any kind of deviation, any kind of twisting things. And that also requires, beyond law, education, awareness, readiness, and most importantly, never forgetting. Because a lot of what happens in our world today, and the reason sometimes history repeats itself, sometimes in the worst possible way, is not forgetting. We cannot afford to have another Holocaust. One time was too many already. And this is the kind of message, that we all recognize that we live in a different world. We live in a world of social media. We live in a world where as much as messaging becomes critical, our enemies are utilizing it to the max. We need to make sure that not only we respond in kind, but make sure that those who are on the right side of history are much louder than our enemies. This is why we need to be together. This is why we need to be unified. This is why we need to put our entire energy in it, because that, my friends, is the difference between a horrible world that we can expect or a different world that we can all enjoy in the aftermath.
Fantastic. Just a follow-up to that unscripted question, by the way. The day after this regime is gone, you know, there's a famous saying, it's true, you have 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But I've also met some of the representatives of different opposition groups from Iran. So I think Cyrus and we're kind of similar in many ways. The day after this horrific regime is gone, are you confident with the points, the pillars you just spoke of? Will they go to the fore for the younger generation of Iran into the future? Because there are many different ideologies vying right now for the hearts and minds of young Iranians.
As I mentioned in my speech, today's Gen Z is, I think, the most aware, alert, and decided as to which path they want to undertake in their future. I think they learned a lot after several attempts at reform. We all remember the first wave, which was at the time of Khatami, and what happened on 18th of Tir to the students who thought that they may have a shot at it. That didn't work. Later on, it was the Green Movement. That also failed. How many times do we have to try the same route and be, at some point, disheartened? And I think if you followed recently some comments coming from former reformists, at least questioning the problem not be necessarily the reform-minded process, but the root cause of it being the revolution itself. And what do we need to move from here? Politically speaking, I think today's realization puts us on a much better path to go beyond this regime. So I think the conclusion as to whether or not this regime has to go is almost a foregone conclusion. Now we need two things. We need to make sure that they have maximum support. You have heard me talk to the world community, political leaders, lawmakers, and I've stressed the importance of a dual track approach, how important it is to in fact implement maximum pressure, and parallel to that, give people the maximum support. These two elements combined will be enough to get rid of this regime domestically, still in the context of a controlled implosion, as opposed to leading to uncertainty and anarchy. But beyond that, it's a question of what happens after the regime collapses. Do we agree as a nation on a process of change that is democratic, that is a due process, that we can in fact prepare the stage for elections of people's representatives? So every aspect of Iran's future, the constitution, the formal regime, is openly and clearly debated, not behind walls. I want a C-SPAN type coverage so everyone knows every day what's being said and what's being argued. Because I really believe that if Iranians are given the opportunity to ultimately vote with a clear understanding of every angle, for the first time in their history, mind you, for the first time in their history have an opportunity to determine their future, I believe that we are there. But as I said, we have to move the needle from hope to belief. I'm not sure how much we have the belief. Why is it not quite there? I'll tell you why. Because maybe they're cynical. Maybe they've seen too many times world governments throwing them under the bus. Maybe they're afraid that yet again, if they go to the streets, they end up being executed, they end up being murdered, and still nothing has changed. Now, there are certain things we can't control. And I've always said to my fellow compatriots, we can only depend on ourselves, not counting on anybody else. But it will be so much better. It will be so much less costly to us, humanly and materially, if we had the support from those who are willing to stand with us. We need to form a coalition of the willing to overcome this regime who is trying to divide us. And that's why we need to understand the true meaning of solidarity in this critical time. And I think my fellow compatriots back home are far more united, but they need that extra element of support from the diaspora and the rest of the world. That's our job. That's your job here, living outside. Make sure that we can bring the maximum level of support for them. And for what it's worth, legislators have to listen to their constituencies. You have to make the issue of Iran a key issue in the upcoming elections this year. And while on this note, whether you vote Democrat or Republican, let's take a page out of the Israeli experience. When it comes to Iran, we expect nothing short of bipartisan support for the liberation of Iranians.
Hear, hear. That was an outstanding answer, especially the last part where you talked about bipartisanship. So to test you a little bit further, we have VOA, CBS, Fox is up there, maybe a few others, and they really came here for the following question. The United States just lost 3 of its finest soldiers in an attack, obviously planned, by the Iranians and carried out by their lackeys. We're well north of 100 similar incidents now targeting U.S. military in the Middle East. If President Biden hasn't called you yet, and if he does in the next few days, what is your advice to this administration in dealing with the continuing, not just threat, but violence targeting Americans?
The wake-up call should be the realization that it is practically appeasement that has been implemented in the last at least couple of years, if not beyond. When I think of the way they rewarded hostage-taking by the regime by paying them ransom money, when we know that the called for oil sanctions actually are not being implemented, which means more cash at the regime's hand, which of course is not going to be spent on suffering people in Iran, but on reinforcing their troops and their proxies. What do you expect as a result? What do you expect? The best line that they could come up with was, "Don't." Are you kidding me? Did you hear Churchill say, "Don't"? Did you hear Ronald Reagan say, "Don't"? No, he said, "Tear down that wall." Without strong leadership, particularly in the Western world, we will have a tough challenge. Let us remind ourselves that what put an end in the Second World War was the strong leadership of Roosevelt in Washington and Churchill in London. What put an end ultimately to the Soviet Empire and forced Gorbachev to in fact go towards perestroika and glasnost was the strong leadership of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. I ask you, vis-a-vis Putin and Xi today, what do we have? Just a question. But all I'm suggesting is that if there's any dependence by decision makers, they have to understand that the world is not going to be silent on that. This is people's power. We have to force the agenda. You have to force the agenda. Don't leave it up to them to decide. They've already proven that they're not making the right decisions. So we have to make the difference. I remember a phrase by President de Gaulle who once said, "Les circonstances ne sont pas favorables, il faudra donc changer les circonstances," which means the circumstances are not favorable, we shall therefore have to change the circumstances. That's the game changer. We need to change the circumstances. So I would say exactly this, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whoever might end up, that this ought to be the new look. As I said, trying to appease Goliath is no longer tenable. Give David a chance. David are the people of Iran. The people of Iran who have been the most natural army on the ground. Had it not been for some bad implementation, regime change got a bad name for a while. To be the truth, it was like taboo wording. You couldn't mention the word regime change in Washington for the last 2 decades. But now they have to rethink whether or not, in fact, that's not the ultimate solution. And we're not asking for America to send troops or invade Iran or do any of these kind of things. No, just support the Iranian people. Stop giving money to the regime, help the Iranian people. Thank you. Help them for what they're asking for. Make sure that they are not disconnected from the world. Make sure they have access to the internet. Make sure that they can get the Starlinks and others helping out there, and so on. Why don't we ask legislators, as long as the law allows it, to use the frozen assets of the regime that in fact is the Iranian people money to in fact fund strike funds so we can help our workers go on strike. We're not asking for American taxpayer or French taxpayers or German taxpayer before our own money could be spent, but that's a matter of changing policy. Why not changing the policy that right now prohibits any means of transferring money back home to help a family? Every one of you could sponsor one family in Iran for small amount of money, but give them a chance to, in fact, be able to stand on their feet and take the risk of going on a strike. That's the quickest way to paralyze the regime. We don't need to go on the streets and get shot at all the time. We can stay home and refuse to go to work. In 3 months, the regime will collapse, if not sooner, if that was able to be done. But instead, it is convenient to brush it around under the rug and kick the can down the road and say, you know what, this is a fait accompli. We have to learn to live with these guys. That's not true. That's not at all true. Because which part of the regime in Iran represents the Iranian people? What legitimacy do they have to sit at the negotiation table? Whether it's JCPOA or any other negotiation, they don't speak for us. They don't represent us. So that's adding insult to injury, because you're turning your back on a nation that shares, by the way, the same values that you do about human rights, about freedom, about liberty. But you still choose to deal with the status quo and help them. We have to make this equation change. And again, I go back to my previous answer. This is where we can make the difference. We can speak up, we can take action, but in unison. I know there will be time for disagreement. That's normal. No, we cannot all think the same thing. But let's do it methodically. Let's do it in an arena where there's truly freedom of expression, when we can have open debates, when we can have free media, when we no longer have political prisoners, when we can have political parties that participate in the political process. Then we can have all the debates. But to get there, and in absence of any of this, there's only one solution. We have to do as Iranians what we need to do, but we need to talk to leaders in the foreign countries that at least claim to be valuing the same values, that rather than negotiating with your sworn enemies, why don't you start helping your true friends? That's how the difference will happen. And that's what we need right now. This is the time. We have to take advantage of this moment, because I don't know how long this window will remain open before yet another generation of Iranians are sacrificed for nothing.
So one more exit question. Very interesting point that Excellency has made, I think, twice, that Gen Z in Iran sounds like they may be almost like the secret weapon emerging in terms of change. The gap between Gen Z in Iran, and you've living in the States now for a quarter of a century, we've all seen it, and where Gen Z is here in terms of their priorities in the States and really generally turning away from international issues and not knowing very much about the past, including Jewish kids, about the Holocaust or anything. How can we connect? How do we get these two parts of Gen Z to begin to communicate with each other? It sounds like that could be a very positive effort for both sides.
Again, using social media as a main tool for information, I'm not saying everything that is out there is necessarily accurate, but for the most part, most of the clips, most of the footage that you get from Iran, every day in the four corners of Iran, what you see on the streets, when citizens that report it one way or the other, they post it either on Instagram or whatever other means there is. I implore politicians, and for that matter, world media, to pay some attention to that. Because if you're only limited to some academic debate in their own echo chamber and so-called panel of experts on Iran who really are detached from that reality, you're not going to get the right read on the streets of Iran. To me, that's the first thing I look at. That's the first indication of where our society is today. What are their daily peeves? What are their daily problems, whether it's economic or otherwise? But ultimately, what does it build up to? Where do we find a common slogan or a common, how shall I put it, direction as to we can all finally find the path? And to convert that into our message, not among ourselves only, but to the world community. This is our ask. This is our priority. This is our expectation. And not let the narrative be controlled by people who know too little or are trying to push an agenda that is not truly the will and the ask of the Iranian people, because we have that problem too. It's not just lack of resolve and determination. There are many elements that could confuse sometimes politicians or legislators, even media. So I think one of the crucial elements is a lot of messaging needs to happen. And one of the, I guess, it's now a matter of habit. When I first started, I remember my years in Cairo, I'm talking at the very beginning, you could hardly get an open line to just dial a number to call, I don't know, Paris or London. Same thing when I was in Morocco. Today on your cell phone, you could be in the middle of the desert with your smartphone and you're connected to all sorts of different platforms and you can communicate instantaneously. It's a different world we live in. It's a tool that despite the regime's attempt to curb, despite trying to force you to be disconnected, or if you need to have filters or VPNs or what have you, the fact is they recognize the power, the potential that exists for this communication. This is very important because a lot of our expectations, if not translated into policy by means of awareness based on proper communication, will never get there. So there has to be a lot of messaging. I think Gen Z is the best equipped to not only understand that, but to properly use these tools. But I think what I invite here is not just Iranians communicating with each other, but Iranians be able to communicate with friends they have across the world. Solidarity in that sense is very important. South Africa was not liberated just by South Africans. The Poles and solidarity in Poland, the solidarity movement was just the Polish people. It was a lot of support from the international community. So I think that's what I would stress, the importance of where Gen Z is today and what they can do. They're only limited by means. And by means, I mean financial means, and not by imagination. So let's help them. Because they will be able, with the proper tools and with proper backing, do so much more. Because everything they've done so far, Sis Mahsa and the Women Life Freedom Movement, they've done it with almost nothing. Imagine what they could do if they actually had some support. That's the game changers. That's what we need to get to, Rabbi.
Thank you. Two last questions. You've been amazing with your time and with your openness. You recently visited Israel. So what did you think you were going to experience, and what actually happened when you spent time in the Holy Land?
I was tremendously moved because it's almost like, you know, often you read history books and what have you, but to actually be there at the wall and sense 25 centuries earlier what took place and what led to it, that was very enlightening. My wife and I really had a very deep emotional visit of the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. That should be on everybody's bucket list, by the way. Again, to know and not to forget is very important. But what struck me the most, despite the fact that I was very well received by government leaders and many of the organizers there, but what really touched me the most was on the day of my departure to fly back from Tel Aviv to, I think it was Paris, I'm not sure. Gila Garmiel, who was our host and the coordinator, and her husband took us to some cafe right by the, I don't know what you call the street right next to where, it looks like Venice Beach in a way, you know, you have all the volleyball and people jogging and all that. And then average Israeli citizens will walk to us, emotionally hugging us, taking pictures, selfies, you name it. But most important thing, the way they said, oh my God, what a different world it would be once Iran is liberated. That's what we want, to have that relationship with Iran, and how pivotal it is for our two countries to have that kind of relationship. This is not some politician saying it. I'm talking about normal people. You saw the reactions of Iranians days after the unfortunate attack, as the regime was trying to orchestrate pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian action. And in a couple of soccer matches in Iran, and I don't think I can repeat these words because
I'll cover my ears.
You're going to hear a lot of bleeping on whatever the media will broadcast. But it was a clear answer of people. I'm not talking about people outside of Iran, mind you. It's much easier to do this in Berlin or London or here in Los Angeles. In Iran proper, under the watchful eyes of the regime, openly saying, you know where you can take that flag. And at the same time, so many images of Iranians and Jews and Israeli solidarity with our flag's reason, as I said in my speech, in many places. That doesn't happen by coincidence. This is not an orchestrated campaign. This is a genuine sentiment, a pent-up sentiment of a nation that has been so humiliated that when they once were traveling the world, most of the time without a visa, when an Iranian passport was respected, and now how we are perceived, imagine that sentiment. And thank God for the parents who remind their children of what Iran used to be like and what it has become. It did not remain like that. We will make it again a great nation. Stronger and better than it ever was. Imagine an Iran 2.0 with everything that we will rectify because it was not mistake-free, let's be honest. But where we were going, Iran should have been today's Japan of the Middle East. Instead, we have become the North Korea of the Middle East. Do we lack resources? Do we lack ingenuity and know-how? Aren't there so many Iranians who actually run companies and corporations and hospitals and universities and many parts of the world that could be in Iran instead but couldn't be there right now? Because many of them were forced to flee simply because they were Jewish or Baha'i or politically different-minded than this regime. We can make it happen again. I ask you once again, don't tell me anymore, we hope. Start telling me, we believe. We believe. We will make it happen.
So to close, we want to make this an interactive point of reference. If you've been watching, your eyes had to go to that amazing photo of the women who led the last sustained public outcry. So we're going to challenge everyone here in the audience to think about the people they represent, your people. What are you prepared to do for them? And I'm going to ask His Excellency to take another look at that visual. And if you can just encapsulate, if she was here right now, what would your promise to her be?
You know, I've been talking to families of many of our victims. I won't name names for discretion reasons, but victims during this movement, people who have been incarcerated, imprisoned, executed. Unfortunately, it keeps going on as I speak. And beyond the promise is, again, the fact that the price we had to pay to get to where we are today, to understand how critical it is to be proactive as citizens in a nation. We can no longer be, as traditionally our country has been for the most part, I believe, sort of passively hoping that a government will be better than another or things will get done. But we don't live in that world anymore. We have to believe that every single citizen and his or her voice is critical in this participation in building a country. You cannot just pass the buck to some authority and say, you get it done, we'll just sit back and watch. As Kennedy once said, ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That philosophy cannot be more true today, because The protests that you see, the price they're willing to pay means that they're not going to take no for an answer. They will demand transparency, they will demand accountability for the people they put in charge, and that's part of the responsibility, a civic duty of citizens, to be their own watchdogs, to make sure that beyond the structure of government, civil society in Iran thrives, that we have the right NGOs, the right institutions. I want to use an example. For instance, talk about women's, their rights. It doesn't matter how many good laws we have in our system. It doesn't matter how well protected they are under the law. I bet you as we speak right now, at least half of Iranian women don't even know what they're entitled to begin with as their normal rights. Do we have, and should we have in the future, institution that gives them added protection? If a woman is battered in the family by a husband, or a daughter is molested, or sexually abused, or anything that forced them to leave the house, do they have a place or a shelter to go to? Can government only do that? No, it goes beyond that. We have to learn from other countries and what they are doing to strengthen our society, give all the equipment, the tools, the knowledge, the know-how, and the implementation to do that. But to change that mindset before we have to protect them legally, I think again I go to the issue of a cultural change. We need to have a change of culture. Farhang sazi, as we say in Farsi. That's the most critical part. It starts at the nucleus of your homes. It starts in our schools. We even have to start thinking of how to educate teachers so they can then educate our children. I don't know how many lawyers we have today that know anything beyond Islamic law. The minute the regime collapsed, we have to at least go back to the previous laws, because while we are in transition, there are elements that will happen that cannot be treated under the current laws. Imagine divorces, inheritance, a lot of things that can happen in transition. There's also the issue of transitional justice. I'm talking to a whole host of people, legal experts to agree those issues, economists to think about what will happen next short term, a roadmap to recovery. This means engaging everyone. It's not just a political exercise. It goes well beyond that. So I think these are the critical issues. And I suppose it's not a promise, it's a commitment to focus on what is most critical, in my view, in my humble opinion, as the nuts and bolts of laying the foundations right. And this is where that messaging is going to give them more understanding of how they can go down that path. We're not going to decide for them, but we have to give them the best means to have the best choice possible so they can then make the ultimate decision. It's a process, and my first commitment, and I was always promised, my entire mission in life is to make sure that I steer this ship out of troubled waters, get them to a safe shore, and lay the groundworks for a democratic transition to our future with their participation, because it is then that they will be able to be involved in the process. And that, I think, is the difference between something we never had in that sense in the past, and that's what we ought to have to start on the right note for our future.
Thank you, Excellency. I think we've been given amazing insight as Iran is between past and future, not just a snapshot of a situation, but the vision of a true leader. We're grateful you've come back to visit us, and the next time perhaps we can meet in Tehran. God bless.
Next year in Tehran. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Yes. Please be seated.
Please wait, ladies and gentlemen. We are almost done. I think this event will go down as a historic event, at least a highlight for many of us, a highlight of our lives. The closing commentary will be from Mr. Eli Elishmereni, the President of Iranian American Jewish Federation. Thank you very much, Your Excellency and Rabbi Cooper.
Thank you, George. Your Excellency, hundreds of people here and millions of people around the world love and admire you. And this is not something new. I remember when you were born. 2 days after Cyrus Day, as a matter of fact, October 31st, and the excitement in the air was palpable. We have a new heir to the Persian throne. 62 years passed, and you made a transformation by visiting Israel, because the way we see you now is as the heir to the throne of Cyrus the Great. Let me tell you how I see you and Cyrus in a similar fashion, and for that, I'm going to go to Xenophon. Xenophon was a general and a student of Socrates who was fascinated by Cyrus, even though Cyrus had died 60 years earlier. He wrote a book called Cyropedia. That book, by the way, was found in Monticello, in Jefferson's library. And in it, he talks about the strength of Cyrus was that he was a unifier. When he went to conquer places, people came toward him and said, we want to be part of this society and the culture that you're talking about, because he respected the differences, they kept their languages, they kept their culture, and there was respect. He was a unifier. You are a unifier. You have unified us. So for a long time, we were thinking about hope, but we're going to start believing. We believe in you. God bless you, and thank you for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the conclusion of the program. Please wait, don't leave. Our important guest has to leave first with his entourage, and then you can leave. Okay? Thank you very much. Let me get my calculator.